Good evening and welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be tonight's host. With me I have a very good friend of mine, Billy Michael from Bethel. We're going to talk about divergent points of view, and we're going to look for common ground within those points of view. Billy, as I understand, would be fairly accurately described as being a libertarian. What's your background, Billy? I understand you've been a libertarian since about 1988. Where were you before 1988? Politically or socially or where were you?
As most of us baby boomers in the music business, I've been a guitar player my whole life. Very much in the hippie mode, going through the 60s with all the music. In 6th grade, I was singing "How Many Roads Must a Man Walk Down Before They Call Him," with Mary Travers, all that kind of, all that sensibility, all that kind of a sentiment that would try to make it a fairer, better world, a gentler, kinder world, all of that, and environment. You know, I would have considered myself one of those people. I never have a car. I used to walk. I remember my college years going to a real Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson kind of a lifestyle. Never being in a car. I used to use the Hart bus. Isn't that funny?
Very commendable.
I used the Hart bus.
Very commendable. I'm glad.
Are you glad? I used to walk and use the bus. And, of course, as life went on, and I established myself as a married man, you know, property owner in our town, Bethel, of course. My views changed as they went, as property ownership, adulthood, fatherhood, being a husband, all that settled in. I found myself becoming more conservative, and then when I really walked into political life, the reading, I found myself with Ron Paul in 1986 and 87, and I became a libertarian, mainly due to a group called Connecticut. There was a group, I can't think of the acronym, but there was a discussion group here in Danbury that has long since dissolved. But John, it doesn't matter who was in it. But that I found myself with, and these guys were all, I was 30-year-old, and these guys were all in their, they must have been in their, late 50s and 60s.
You would mention that because some of the people that you know now, one gentleman in Ridgefield who's in his 80s now, that you have that strong gravitational pull too. So now, you evolved into a libertarian, and I have a lot of friends that are libertarians. I had a young man on my show about a month ago who is friends with my son, considers himself a libertarian, very much a very high affinity for Ron Paul. And we talked about libertarianism to the extent that Kyle had been immersed in it. And he was lightly into it at that point. I'm sure he's a little bit more into it now. But now seems like there's at least some common denominator between progressivism. People call me liberal, people call me progressive. Similarities. But there's certainly some similarities between libertarians and progressives. And let me put this thought to you and let you comment on that. Progressives, or liberals, if you will, believe in efficient government. We believe the government can do great things. It can accomplish a lot of things that individuals cannot accomplish in smaller groups. So we believe in efficient government, not bloated government, but efficient government. And libertarians believe in smaller government. So it's efficient government versus smaller government. And I'm not sure if there's really a huge divergence of thinking there. Would you want to comment on that?
Well, do you think if the opposite of progressives would be considered conservatives
or regressives,
do regressives believe in inefficient government?
I'm not sure. That's a good question, and I'm not sure what the answer would be. That's going to take some thought on my part, and we could talk about that a little further now, and we could talk about that at a future date. But I think of people being regressives as being more of a social issue, more social than economic. more social than economic, and I apologize for
Yeah, that happens. Good thing that we weren't at a funeral or a wedding and that happened.
Good Lord,
Oh
yes.
my! Imagine being in a church service and having that go off.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's just...
Well,
There you go.
because I think that we're all for efficient government.
Yes.
I don't think conservatives want inefficient government. I think you're right. I think progressives want efficient government. I know that libertarians view government as a servant of the people rather than a master, and I think progressives would... I don't think there's any difference between progressives and, say, conservatives, if you want to use progressives, and libertarians. I think we all want government to be a servant of the people instead of a master. I know you, I mean, we disagree on a lot of stuff, but I've never thought you to be someone who espouses government being the master of the people. No.
No, or government being big for the sake of being big. That's the furthest thing, I think, from anyone's mind. I think all of us as Americans, if we were asked that question, and poll questions can be asked a lot of different ways in order to look for certain answers. But I think honest questions that get honest answers, everybody that would be asked, are you for more efficient government? Everybody would say, yeah. And a follow-up, if more efficient government included, amongst other things, smaller government, more economically, lower cost government, undoubtedly, every one of us would say, yeah, that's absolutely. We're not sure exactly how to get there. We all have different routes to get there, but it seems to be that's the end point for all of us. Now, I want to just divulge back before I threw my cell phone away. You talked about progressive and regressive, and that's why I call myself a progressive, because I believe that that the future holds great things for us. We've seen some marvelous things happen. We've seen, in the United States particularly, we've seen slavery ended. We've seen, I believe, Social Security is a good plan, a safety net for individuals. But I look to the 21st century. Progressives look to the 21st century and beyond to make the world a better place. We're very optimistic, where I think regressives would look backwards and say, oh, how much more wonderful things were back in the good old days, and how I wish we could have things back the way they were in the beginning of the country. But they forget about the fact that in the beginning of the country we had slavery, women weren't allowed to vote. There's a lot of bad things that we've come away from as our country has evolved in a positive fashion. Thoughts?
I would think your statements make come to mind a statement of a woman that left Russia, and she said, in America, there are casualties. There are casualties that fall through safety nets, but she says, where I come from, we are all casualties. And I think that's the biggest difference between the regressive, between a progressive and someone like me. I think that I do look back knowing full well that we have our quota of contradictions in American life. You could say we were founded on freedom and liberty, and then you look at the slavery issue, or you look at any number of things, women not being allowed the right to vote. There's a lot of things that contradict the basis of the Founding Fathers document. But I think even with those contradictions, it was still the freest country, a constitution that was based the greatest emphasis on individual freedom and liberty, and I believe the 200 years of that premise, as penned by the Founding Fathers, has provided the greatest good for the greatest amount of people in the history. I think the American enterprise has done the best by the most. And what I think the people that, when you say, are looking back versus your forward-looking look as a progressive, is that they think that we're giving up, the progressive dream gives up too much of the human freedom and liberty that allowed people to run their lives in a way to become property owners, to own businesses, to fulfill their dreams and flourish both personally, emotionally, and economically. I think that's where we are divergent. That's what I think it is. I think they look back to a greater amount of freedom, and most of it is to do with a smaller imprint of government on their day-to-day life.
I'm with you, and I think I can kind of encapsulate it this way. I'll try, and then you can tell me what you think about this. But I think that sometimes progressives forget about some of the goods that have been throughout our history, some of the good points, some of the good concepts throughout our history. And I think libertarians sometimes forget about some of the bads that have been throughout our history. But there's a balance, I think, that we all can certainly agree on. You know, take a look at the good, reasonable look at the good in our history, and reasonable good, and to take the things that we all find to be somewhat a little bit objectionable at least, and move beyond that. But at the same time, try to maintain all those positive things. So there's a balancing act to be had here, and I guess that's why we're on this show. Is that you and I have always been very comfortable talking to one another, and we're always looking for those common grounds rather than getting caught up in buzzwords and phraseology that causes one person to, when they hear that phrase from somebody that they might disagree with, to turn them off. And that's what does us all in. That's what does harm to all of us. Now, would you mind talking about states' rights versus federal, state versus federal? Because I think it sounds to me from what I've read that this is something that's a difference of opinion probably between progressives and libertarians.
I don't feel that I'm well versed enough in that to debate, not to debate it, but even to talk about. I know as a premise of most I would say all libertarians, they feel that the encroachment of federal power. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
The setting of the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit across the country, like that would be considered by a libertarian as an authoritarian, top-down decision. Why should Washington tell somebody in Montana that they're going to have the same speed limit as somebody in New York City, and going the I-95 going through New York City?
Yeah.
I understand that. Seatbelt laws, another one of it's one of my pet peeves. I think that seatbelt laws should be. I think they should decriminalize the non-use of seatbelts. I think that should be up to the individual. I know there's arguments against the economic arguments because of insurance. I understand that, but I don't like the fact that like someone like the National Transportation
Safety Board.
There's a bunch of names that I can't, all these acronyms.
Yeah.
But they all set standards in Washington, and they come down to 50 states. Louis Brandeis was one of, and I don't know when he was on the Supreme Court, but I know that name, Brandeis University. I should know this if I'm going to quote him on television. But he said the strength in America is not in our uniformity, it's in our diversity, it's in our pluralism. And he said the United States has 50 laboratories of democracy. And what the federal government has done is by instituting, like they federalize everything.
Yeah.
So the genius of individuals in those 50 states can never enact themselves through their state legislatures, of which you were going to be one.
Yeah.
You were going to be a state legislator. So someone like you can't even exercise your ability to get through problems, to solve problems, because the federal government has already decided for us.
Yeah.
Now, these are two teensy instances.
Yeah.
The speed limit at 55, which was eventually relinquished because it was so ridiculous.
Yeah, but you still have a standard, I believe, a maximum in any state of 75.
Well, I don't mind. I think the state has every right to legislate speed limits. I don't think the federal government, given the Constitution of this country, I don't know where those powers came to the federal government and all the lobbyists that control those legislators to tell us what to do. And I'm going to say, because I'm not articulate in this because I don't know enough, but I do know that those two little things would be examples of of the government getting too big, of the federal. You said states' rights.
Yeah.
I don't. But I'm very involved in local property rights.
Yes.
Now, how long have you been in Bethel? Your whole life? Have you been here?
Since 1973.
All right. So 1973, you come to Bethel. So you were grown up.
Yeah,
You were
in college.
You're
And my
college.
first wife and I bought a condo in Plumtree Heights, and that was our first home.
Now, would you think that so for the last 23 years, from like 1986 was the last time a budget in Bethel passed at a town meeting. Mm-hmm. The rest were all decided on a machine vote, which mm-hmm. was instituted by the Bethel Action Committee. We worked for that. Now, in these 23 years, has there ever been a time when a progressive like you, as a property owner, agreed with a libertarian like me and voted either against the swimming pool, the town golf course, an annual budget, or were you always on the side of the raise the tax or just to grow the, I don't know, did you ever vote with BAC?
No, but let me tell you why. I've always felt like that we have people that donate incredible numbers of hours mm-hmm. on committees, volunteer work on the budget committees, and on volunteer posts with the town, and they give willingly of themselves and get nothing, really nothing in return, except sometimes a little aggravation from people that disagree with them. And my thinking is that if those people have spent all those volunteer hours coming to arrive at a budget, to arrive at what they feel is a reasonable budget, that unless that budget is way out of whack this way or way out of whack that way, I feel obligated to demur to those people and their time spent. And if I don't like what they're doing, my goal should be to take their place and to do what I think is right. But when they go through all these literally hundreds of hours of hard work to arrive at a budget, I feel like in all probability that budget is probably within reasonable limits. Mm-hmm. And I know we fought battles over budgets that we ended up with a very small reduction in budgets. And you mentioned one time where the budget was defeated too high, and the response from the government was, from our elected officials, was to raise the budget. And I remember that, and I know it didn't make sense to me either back then, that if the townsfolk say, no, too high, then the clear message from the voters is reduce it. Mm-hmm. But we've had budget battles that went on sometimes 6 budgets.
That was 1998. And we were talking about 98 people in the show that are longtime Bethel residents will remember, because Charlie Steck and John Thiel were selectmen. We were talking about that budget. That was quite an episode in the life of Bethel's budget making process. Yeah. But so even if you don't think that I don't know how to say this. If you think that the government, if government growth is spending is growing at a rate that is out of whack with the growth in personal income or your personal income, mm-hmm. right. you would defer to the people on those volunteers that are acting otherwise mm-hmm. Or counter to your, I mean, I don't want to say it's your interest. Maybe it's your interest to keep more of your income at the end of the year or pay lower mm-hmm. property taxes. But you would defer to the elected officials.
I would defer to them, or I would seek to replace them with myself.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think that, and I'm losing my train of thought a little bit. I may have to come back to that. Let me ask you about. We're talking federal power, state power, because this is throughout American history. This has been a mm-hmm. constant battle, and a lot of times that battle is on social issues. We know that we had the federal government stepped in when we had southern states that had laws, Jim Crow laws, that were eventually deemed unconstitutional. And the federal government stepped in, and the states involved, which are principally in the South, principally the original, the Confederate states, fought against the fought against the federal government in order to keep these types of laws. This is where I think, in social senses, this is where I think the federal government has the obligation to step in and institute something that's equal across the country. You can't have free states and slave states. You can't have states where women can vote and women can't vote. You can't have states that have very, because I just don't see that as being being consistent in terms of what our moral grounds and our moral beliefs are. So we have to find that common ground.
Would you think that it would be okay to have states where seatbelt usage was permissive and other states where it is required? Could you go that far?
I will say that there's certainly a temptation to have states have the right to talk about those types of things. There are no absolutes in seatbelt use, although we know statistically seatbelts, save lives, cut down on insurance costs. There's good in them, but I think there should be some latitude for states to have in terms of things of that nature, things that are not absolutes. They're not social things; they're more economic things, and I can see your point in that.
No, I'm just asking. I'm wondering if there is a body of. What about one of the big ones, same-sex marriages? Should that be federalized or should that be state, in your view?
That's a good question, and I'm not. Intuitively, I say, because I believe in equality of people, and that the way I explain to my friends and the way I explain to my children when they're growing up, and they're all heterosexual. Not that that matters one way or the other, but the way I explained it to them was love is love is love, and whether it's a man and a woman or a man and a man or as long as they're within the same species. Remember, it used to be illegal in a lot of states for blacks to marry whites. I believe as long as there's love involved, you can't legislate. They call it legislating morality, but it goes beyond that. I mean, when people are in love, no government, federal government, state government, or any government should stand in the way of them being in love. And I'll throw in real quickly that I think the same applies in terms of abortion, the other big issue besides homosexuality. And I tell folks that I'm completely against any government, state, local, federal, any government being able to tell a woman that you cannot have an abortion. And this is sort of libertarian in a sense, and you can say yay or nay to that. But the reason why I say that is because if you give any government the power to tell a woman now that you can't have an abortion, you've implicitly given that government the power one day, if we have overpopulation or for any other reason, the government, federal, state, local, or otherwise, to tell a woman, oh, by the way, we have too many people. You have to have an abortion, like China does now. So if you give the government power in one direction, you've already given it the power in the other direction by giving it that one power. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, the libertarians are very divided on abortion issue. On the abortion issue, I never debate it because I just don't have a big overall expertise in and I like
it's tough for men. It's tough for men to weigh in on abortion because it's really it's a man's issue in the sense that it's a family issue, and as the law is written now, it's an issue which is left up to the woman, her family, and her doctor. So it's a family issue.
In the thicket of abortion, as far as rights go, the right to be called reproductive rights. If a man, this is what Ron Paul said, if he harms a pregnant woman, he can be sued for hurting two people. If someone kills a pregnant woman, they can be charged with 2 murders.
Right.
And as Ron Paul was saying, because I didn't think of this, but he was saying how you have, in one sense, the unborn fetus has rights not to be shot, not to be harmed. And then in the other case, the unborn fetus has no right to being aborted. You see what I'm saying? It's a conflict. It is a conflict to me. It's to see, so I don't know how we weigh things out. God willing,
it's a very, very convoluted discussion to talk about anyway, because you have the two sides on the issue. One side, the side that's pro-choice, a woman having a choice to have an abortion, Also, quite often, those people are anti-war, anti-capital punishment. So they're and folks that are pro-life will look at that and say there's an inconsistency there. And likewise, people that are pro-choice will find an inconsistency in people that are pro-life and say to them, well, if you're pro-life, how could you be anything but a pacifist? How could you be in favor of capital punishment, killing of people? And so there's a lot of inconsistencies, and it's going to be it's always a tough subject to discuss.
The problem with capital punishment is, from a libertarian point of view, is a libertarian does not readily give to a group of people the power to do something that an individual can't do.
Right.
So if taking your life is against the law for me as an individual, me with a group of people taking your life as a committee, as a jury, as a court, is equally reprehensible. And this leads to huge philosophical, spiritual, religious debates. And it's funny we're doing the show because generally I talk about property taxes. Like these are areas that I don't go into.
You're well versed in them.
I just know I know the depth of what I don't know about these things. What I do know a little bit about is Bethel's property tax battles.
Let's talk about that then. Okay, let's segue into and again you put forth a thought, and then we can toss it back and forth.
Well, the inception of my political activity came in the early 1980s when I saw the public forum, not the public forum, the town meeting was inhabited by the various groups and interest groups that were going to derive the most benefits from that budget. From that, when I got started, it was $19 million. Now it's $60 million. And interestingly, a lot of people will say, Billy Michael of the Bethel Action Committee or Matt Paulson, they want to keep the town like in Flintstonesville in the dark ages. And there hasn't been that. I mean, it really hasn't been that. And if you read anything that comes out of Dr. Chesley's office or the press releases, the schools are, we have the best music program, one of the top 100 in the country, the ROTC, it goes on and on, the accolades. So you can't say that a taxpayer group is active as BAC, and it's successful. We've been very successful in amplifying the voice of resistance to proposed property taxes. You can't say we destroyed the school system.
No.
And I'll tell you, people don't realize. I know you've seen this. This goes out every so often. And when you look at this was 2008. So this is current. I mean, this is last year.
Okay.
Bethel's spending per pupil spending was $11,549. Brookfield's comes in at $10,006.
We're going to have to break off there. I want you to come back as quickly as possible.
All right.
Next week we have on Merrick Alpert, who's running in a primary against Chris Dodd next year for the Democratic senatorial campaign. We're going to have Billy Michael back real soon. We've had a wonderful discussion today, and we're going to continue that discussion. I'm David Stevenson, and again, Billy Michael, and this is Progressive Soup. Thank you for joining us.
What a great show! Yeah.